Go ahead, Nate. You are good.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Citizens Advisory Executive Team meeting. It is September 15th. I'm Becky McCabe, board member. And Jillian Barker,
board member.
It's a little hard to hear you, Jillian.
Okay, I'm going to be back.
Okay. Tonight we're going to, we have a short meeting. I'm hoping that we can cover a lot in a short period of time. It is 6:03 on Tuesday, September 15th. So we will start with citizen comments. Mr. Smith, how many comments do we have tonight?
We have one comment. Do we need to have the statement read?
We lost Jillian. Lynn, do you have it?
After doing that audio tape, I should have it memorized.
Jillian, do you by chance have the statement for citizens comment right there?
I do. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Are we ready?
Yes, please.
The school code provides for a public comment period at each board meeting subject to reasonable constraints. The practice of this board is to limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker to a total of 30 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers addressing the board are expected to maintain a reasonable level of civility. Also, personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. Comments regarding individuals should be respectful. Insults and defamatory remarks have no place in this setting. The board will terminate public comment if speakers cannot adhere to these guidelines. Please identify yourself at the beginning of your remarks.
Hi, my name is Terry Nagel. I have a daughter at Redling Middle School in 8th grade, and I have a son who's a junior at St. Charles East. My son was doing some homework on Friday, and when he brought it to my attention, a word association exercise that he was given in English, which he found a little disconcerting, so he decided he would take a screenshot of some of the things that he was supposed to do, and he brought it to my attention after he was done completing the task because it was some sort of timed quiz. Now, he told me this was for English class, which somewhat confused me because it was more of a word association. It was in the upper left-hand corner of the computer screen. There was a column that said harmless objects or Black Americans, and in the right-hand column of the screen, it said weapons or white Americans. The exercise said that you press I for one category, E for the other category, and that each photo you were shown would only fit in one category. If you got it wrong, a red X would appear, and you'd have to hit a different key to continue. So what then happened was a 2-inch by 2-inch photo would flash onto the screen, and you had to quickly respond. Was that a harmless object or a Black American, or is that a weapon or a white American? It seems odd for English class to me, and I was wondering where this curriculum comes from, if this is something that is directed by the board. He said the study said that it was from Harvard University, which I'm like, okay, it seems more like a psychological operation and a survey than it does an English test. And my daughter then brought to my attention and my wife's attention on Sunday in her social studies class it seems as though it's written to follow the 1619 project of the New York Times, where it's explaining how horrible America was and its founding was horrible. The quotes that it used from Thomas Jefferson and other founding fathers was, they're obviously their quotes, but we also need to teach that these men were great men. They were geniuses. They founded this country on good things, not bad, and they were flawed like many men are. And this seemed more geared towards teaching kids not about slavery as much as it was teaching that America was bad and founded on bad principles. This also was very disconcerting to me and my daughter. And again, I want to know, does this curriculum come from the board? Was it approved by the board? Or is this something that the teacher is doing on their own? If you would please address both these topics, I will be logged into the meeting tonight and listening. And I appreciate any information you can give me. And you're welcome to email me.
That concludes the comment. I cut off the email at the end.
Thank you. Dr. Pearson, you'll make a contact.
This sounds like something that Dr. Herman should be looking into from a curriculum standpoint. So we'll have her reach out to the parent. Mr. Smith, if you could just share the email address with Dr. Herman, she can investigate.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, so for the exec team, thank you for coming tonight. It's been a while since we've seen you, and we appreciate your being here and the time. Tonight, what we're going to cover is we want to debrief regarding our July meeting, which, like every month in this COVID time, feels like a year ago, as well as talk about Thursday. Thursday doesn't really require too much from us in planning. And then we also want to cover some of the roles and responsibilities of CAC members. So that's what our agenda is scheduled to look at like tonight. So you all received from Mrs. Smith the compilation of the notes from our small breakout sessions following the presentation from Dr. Pearson regarding our commitments and the strategies that the district is using to make decisions. I'm hoping you got a chance to look over them, read some of those notes, and so kind of want to find out what you debrief on what you felt, how the meeting went, as well as anything you gleaned out of the comments that we have recorded. If there's anything that stood out, any questions that it might have added to your thinking. So we're opening the floor to those of you on the team.
Okay, I'm gonna use my best memory because it was July. I thought the meeting went well. I think the breakout groups really worked well. As always, there's never enough time though, right? And yet I think that you gave us additional time even. I just think that the conversations were very involved and rich. And so we were just going and going. When I looked at that compilation of information, I found it interesting that so many of the groups had many of the same types of thoughts and comments. Lots of people thinking the same things. That's my simple memory.
Someone else?
I'm not sure how, I'm sorry, because I'm on the phone, I can't see, so I don't know how many other folks are there.
Yeah, there's just four exec team members.
So this is Jennifer Black. I think what I struggled with at the meeting, what my group struggled with at the meeting in the first, I would say like 20 minutes of, or 15 minutes maybe, in our groups is about, it was really about timing and relevance. the group is really struggling with why they were doing this exercise when there were so many other pressing matters at hand. And with regards to, and so many questions still to be answered about the school year. Once we got past that, so once I kind of took them through that, you know, this was an agenda item, we were sticking with items that, you know, we had previously identified prior to COVID. And we kind of, once they comprehended that, then I think we got on and the, you know, the comments are reflected here in the notes. But I did want to just say that we've always got to remember relevance. And when we kick off meetings, kind of, you know, even saying, look, today we're not going to focus on, you know, where everyone's heads are because we want to keep looking forward. You know, I just felt like we maybe needed to set the stage just a little bit better ahead of that meeting.
And I think that's definitely relevant when we talk about, okay, what are we doing for Thursday? So perhaps that, you know, while we're kind of like jumping forward with that thought, it really goes to, okay, why are we talking about finance? And so that there's an understanding of why we decided to do the commitments and finance as we're rolling into the facilities master plan. Those things are absolutely relevant and necessary to understand. So making sure that that's really clear. Because our heads are in all sorts of places, aren't they?
Garrett or Kelly?
I would just echo the relevance piece. I think we probably should have picked a more applicable topic from a timing standpoint. I go back to an early comment that was made by the executive team about providing, and this is early on in our initial meetings, providing a charge from the board as far as what the board is asking and trying to solicit from a feedback standpoint from the community. And this exercise, I feel like was a disconnect. The other thing I feel like I have to say is on the August 10th board meeting, when I think about, and I get the fluidity of the situation, but when I think about what this group has been charged with and providing feedback to the board and the necessary items around the commitments and their perspective. And then on the August 10th board meeting, when the board passes or approves language around the fact that this is going to be, and I don't have the exact language, it's around minute 55 of August 10th, how we're going to have to take into consideration the fact that the impact that the pandemic has had on this work and the responsibilities of the board and the commitments of the district. And so I think about how that would translate if I was speaking to my kids. And I actually took the opportunity to kind of make it a teachable moment. And this also, you know, impacts the relevance. If we're going to provide this feedback on the commitments, and then that is going to be super fluid at the next board meeting and change as far as what the board's perspective is on that, it's going to make it really tough for the CAC to be successful. And so I think about the opportunity for me to talk to my child, my 9-year-old, about kind of this pandemic and the experiences that he's having. And I think about it from kind of an athletic standpoint. So he's in baseball. He plays in the Wasco League. Everybody is fully hypersensitive to the challenges that our community is feeling from this pandemic. Situations vary depending on household, but my community and the circle that I'm with is keenly aware of the challenges and what our district is feeling. And so if I were to say to him, you know what, I want you to go out there and try your best, but know that we're in the midst of a pandemic. And so if you don't make contact with the ball, that's okay. It's okay. We'll put a little asterisk next to this season. And I think about that effort, the effort the CAC is putting forward, the time and the commitment that our administration is taking, the time and the commitment that our board is taking. And for us to have to highlight that and say, you know what, there's going to be a pass on some of these commitments. There's going to be a pass on some of the success that we're going to try to achieve. That was the message that I heard following that July CAC at the August 10th board meeting. And so it was disheartening from the standpoint of the work that we had done and talked about. And again, I chalk it up to the timing and the fluidity of the situation. And I'm not at all trying to suggest or make light of that. But it was a disconnect in relevance, and then a disconnect between what the board has charged this group to do today. That's it.
Thank you. We are going to talk a little bit about the CAC roles and responsibilities. So I would like to talk about that a little more later, if you don't mind. So, because I think Mrs. Barker and I have had a conversation or two about the board and the charge that CAC should have. So I want to stay right now on the debrief, but we'll definitely come back to talk about the roles and responsibilities, if that's okay with you, Garrett. Kelly?
Hey, everybody. Long time no see. Can you hear me okay? Okay. First time with the headphones, so trying them out.
Great.
You know, thanks, Jill, for taking a group for me. I had some internet issues and I ended up joining the call a little bit late on the last CAC meeting. I did join eventually and was put into the group, and I missed the intro. So when I came into it, I had no idea what we were doing. I had no clue as to why we were doing what we were doing. So that disconnect that Garrett said was really real for me, because I was like, why are we looking at what the board needs at this moment in time? Not necessarily that I don't think we should look at that. It was just a timing issue for me. So I'm glad that you're going to speak to that later, Becky and Jill. One that I really struggled with in the conversation that we had was retaining of staff, high quality staff, and key indicators. And we had a good discussion about that. We could have probably had a couple more hours about that, especially in the times that we're living right now. We're struggling with what were they looking for and what is the percentage now, and you know, just different ideas of, you know, have we done any exit interviews? Have we done any building? And then we had a woman on our team, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name, but she had actually applied at D303 and didn't get the job, and it was an interesting experience that she talked to us about. So I just think it was kind of difficult to do this activity, according to me. I wasn't sure what the focus or I don't want to say this the wrong way, but sometimes I feel as the executive team, we want to lead them into something, not necessarily an outcome, but some kind of what's the end, what are you looking for, what do you want? I think we did really great with what we had, but I feel it was a definite disconnect for me at that last meeting. I didn't think that's what we were charged to do at the beginning, and I'm feeling a little unclear focus at this point in time. With, you know, I thought it was going to be more of a community building and activity, and it's really more, it's not. So I don't know what else to say, but yeah. So I'm anxious to hear about what, you know, we're getting back on the path with facilities, correct, at the next meeting, and I'm anxious to get back into some normalcy. I too have curriculum issues with my children and defunding the police and some other topics. So I wrote down that doctor's name, and I will be sending that person an email, and I have issues with a couple of teachers. And yeah, so I'm glad to be back on this call, but that's it.
I want to go ahead and clarify before we all feel more confused. This was part of the learning segments that we had decided before school closed, and we were, you know, in on March 13th. So it was a long time ago, but good thing I keep careful notes. When we decided that one of the big things that we would be doing would be to be integral in the process of the facilities study, and you know, plotting out what things that we would need to do for that. This was part of it. And looking at the district's commitments was a very important part of it. Getting a district an idea of the scope of the district. That was the first one that Dr. Pearson did. And then the second one was the commitments, was like part 2. And then the finance was the third part. Those were necessary learning pieces that this group decided that the rest of the CAC needed to have, and we need, this group needed to have as well, to be able to be more active, functional, and function as a CAC, as a CAC should function in its advisory role. So we're still in like the learning process that was supposed to be done in May, just behind. So maybe I hope that kind of clarifies why we were doing that, even though our brains were somewhere else. But our brains have to be geared up to be able to understand some of the pieces that we're going to need to talk about with that facilities master plan. I keep calling it all different things, but I think we all know what I'm talking about.
And maybe we just don't make it clear enough. Because what we're going to do Thursday, as was mentioned before, is not going to be a facilities issue. It's not going to be about what the schools are doing right now. It's going to be about the finance, because in order to do the future work, we felt that the CAC members, I think we all agreed, the CAC members needed to know things. Now, the disconnect is going to happen for probably for the whole year. And maybe that's what we need to consider when we plan future meetings, is how do we take what's happening in real life to what also the work of the district is.
Well, but so I think we actually, to that exact point, so I think what we didn't do is we didn't follow the meeting format that we'd agreed to. So we'd agreed that we were going to have this X amount of minutes where we talked about what were on people's minds. And I don't recall having that on the meeting. And I think what that could have really helped. I mean, I think there's two things we have to really think hard about right now. One, do we feel as though the broader CAC has the same understanding of the need to look forward? And that I mean, we're going to talk about this later, but what I'm hearing right now is we want this group to be looking forward while others focus on the here and now. And I think if we would have stuck to our meeting format where we had our session where people could get, have that minute, those minutes to say, here's what's going on in my mind right now. And okay, now we're going to look forward and stick to the learnings that we need to address facilities, then it might have been a little bit clearer. I think what happened is I don't have all of my minutes in front of me, but I felt like we just jumped right into, okay, we're going to talk about, this today. And it was like almost as if COVID wasn't happening. And I don't recall there being a setup, which kind of told people, we know that your minds must be in A, B, and C, but we need them to go here.
I agree, Becky. There is going to be a disconnect this year, even more so than ever. However, to the point that Jen was making there, we have to segregate some of the time for an elephant that is this massive in the room. And so we've got to address that, even if it's from leadership, from executive team, whoever, we've got to give that some opportunity to kind of decompress and get that information off their chest. And then again, be visionary towards what the community sees from a facility standpoint moving forward.
So then maybe Thursday we should add, I don't know what name we landed on. What's the buzz is the only thing I keep pulling up, but do what's the buzz? It'll have to be really time constrained, so we aren't there for very long.
But we agreed it would be time constraint. We agreed, I think, on 20 minutes. Do I remember that correctly?
I can look back at my notes.
I don't remember.
And
we go into small group since it's virtual, and maybe what's the buzz with one exec member and some CAC members, and just discuss what's happening and take copious notes and report back, like 15 minutes and then a 5-minute report back or something. I don't know.
Well, I thought that the format of What's the Buzz was kind of two-way. So I'm going to express a concern, and if there's an answer out there that somebody can give to me, somebody can give that to me. If it's something that somebody needs to do some further research, we don't know the answer to that. But we kept a pretty tight time constraint because it, especially now, can get long and overwhelming. And we know that the concerns are out there. Not that we don't want to hear them, but I think if we open it up wide, we'll never get to our meeting content. And maybe that 20-minute What's the Buzz that we had agreed upon in our meeting format will give some time to what's on people's minds right then. And then, as Jen said, move into where we need to go looking forward.
I know there was a parking lot feature to it as well.
Yeah.
That's what I call it, where you write it down, it's there, somebody will address it eventually, but maybe not at this meeting. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn about not all of us hearing, and then not being some things Dr. Pearson might be able to answer quickly. So I'm torn, but I think the small groups would also give people a voice that we don't, that might not have a voice if we're all together.
And we would have to think about the feedback and the way that people would get answers to those questions and get the questions and the answers to everyone. If we did it in a small group format.
Yeah, and
at this point, the agenda is set and it has, I'm sorry. At this point, the agenda has been set and it's been sent out, but there is also a superintendent's report piece on that. So that isn't to say that perhaps we could put it in the superintendent's report. I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Pearson, but I'm just thinking process-wise that might be a place that we can insert it.
Yeah, that would work fine if that's how we want to do it, but then we would need to probably do it as a whole group.
I agree. We should do it as a whole group. That's how just because we're meeting virtually shouldn't change the dynamic of what we agreed as the setup for these meetings.
So I am looking, what about in future agenda items?
what do you mean?
We can put that instead of in the superintendent's report, because that's before the presentation. I would want our heads. Well, maybe it is better at the beginning.
Let's get it in the beginning, because I think what I'm hearing is get it off of your mind so that you can focus on the next piece. And we can speak to the reason why we're doing what we're doing as well. And it would fit under the superintendent's report, I think, fairly nicely. Okay. Well,
I also think that it is totally fair for Dr. Pearson to be able to set that out in the right frame of mind. We know that probably everyone in this room has 1 or 10 questions, about this school year. But let's get the big thing, like the things the community, we're here as a community group, to hear what the community needs answers to in a 20-minute, and like really setting out, like we're going to be strict to the 20 minutes because we have a lot of other matters that we need to attend to.
right. And people can also, if somebody says, all right, this is what I need to know, we could say, put a thumbs up if that is an issue you would have talked about or something, so that we don't repeat the same thing over and over again. I mean, it'll be the first time we've done it, so we'll have to.
People could also use the chat function if they felt more comfortable doing that.
Carol, is it fair to say that if they ask a question that's on some of our district Q&As, that you could just simply direct them to that instead of taking the time to re-answer that question?
I could. There's 75 questions and answers on the FAQ, but But
Right,
yes,
but if I'm
sure.
asking a question that we know is on the FAQ, and we have 20 minutes. If I'm asking a question that's on the FAQ and we have 20 minutes, we're going to save some time by you being able to say, because you know what those 75 are. You know, that's a question that's answered on our FAQ. Will you, you know, can you take a look there? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think if we can answer questions pretty quickly, we don't want to waste the time for them to ask questions. They might not ask questions. They might just have comments. And that's okay too. So, all right, we will plan on that. We'll put it under the superintendent's report, and we'll make sure that it's explained well so that people will recognize it, and it'll become part of all of our meetings. To go back to the notes, there were a couple of things I wondered about in terms of the notes that came out of the meeting, especially where we're at right now. There were some things that I thought were really important to highlight, that people really liked the personalized learning and authentic learning as well. And so my wondering is, what from those conversations that you had, even with the disconnect, even with, you know, we are 2 months away from that, what would you want the board to take from the comments and questions that were asked? There's some pretty good questions in here that I thought were important. And I think that there are things that could be summarized to give to the board to say, here's a conversation that we had. Here's where people landed. Here are the things that are still out there. I mean, there's no reason why we can't come back to this in another time and see what teachers are doing, see what kids are doing to answer the questions that people might still have. If that's what the board is looking for, if that's what the CAC says, we want more information in this area. So I'm wondering what you think you would want the board to take from the conversations we had. Nothing?
I'm just kind of refreshing. I'm looking through. I do think that we had a lot of, when it came to innovative learning, I recall our group, you know, once we had a handle on the definition and everything else, I think that there are some of the responses, and it's hard for me to switch between the phone and my emails at the moment, but the pieces about that Carol listed, I think, in number 4, self-reflection, inviting innovators and entrepreneurs to the table to increase and utilizing the community more in that way. I think those are really, I know we already do some of that, and right now that might look very different, but going forward, you know, how can we use the expertise of our parents, of our community members, et cetera, to help with innovative learning? I thought that was a fairly interesting conversation.
I think the conversation about responsive learning, and perhaps it was a highlight because of the current situation, but there's lots of comments about relationships between kids, relationships between staff and students, communication with parents, mentoring of kids. At one point, I'm trying to find the phrase. I'll find it and I'll pop back in. But just the kind, we're talking about people that we hire and just them having that emotional connection. Then let me find the phrase or I'll be babbling. So I'll let someone, I'll come back in.
So I'm wondering if it's important for I think as a board member that I would want to know what the CAC thought of the commitments. I would want to know if they saw it happening before COVID, and if it's still something that they think is valuable. If what Garrett was talking about, that the board, I have to go back and see what you're talking about, Garrett. I'm sorry, I don't remember us saying we're giving up our commitments, but I'll go back and listen. If that is what the community, the CAC says is really important, then I think that the board needs to know that even though we're in the pandemic and in a historical place, we still really believe it's important for relationships. We still believe the quality educators should be part of it, that responsive learning, that authentic learning, that we want it to be personalized. We don't know how that's going to look, but these are really important to us. To me, that would say a lot.
In my group, it's emotional intelligence, by the way, is what the phrase I was looking for. In my group, I mean, my memory is we didn't really talk about COVID. We talked about these commitments, and lots of the examples that were given were not surrounding COVID. They had been people's personal experiences prior to what we're living right now. So yes, I think these are historical. People have experiences in these commitments prior. They saw areas where we could keep moving forward and keep growing, but definitely feeling like the district is indeed doing things to follow these commitments.
So yeah, I would say, Garrett, maybe you can and just kind of let me know if I'm right about this. This was during the discussion of the goals, right? Are you referring to that?
Yeah.
Yes. I know exactly. Yeah, I do. And there was a point where I did have to say, we need these goals because these are important to our commitments. Even though I think people thought that there was some excusing of, well, should we even be looking at this now because of the pandemic? So I do know what you're talking about. I do remember that conversation. And I do see sometimes how the conversation at the board table is sometimes a discussion, and sometimes it is, maybe a directive, and it's not always clear which one is which. So
this was actionable. The entire board voted to support the change in this language, the addition of this language, and so every board member supported this change.
That's,
I guess maybe a salient theme that in my group there was only 2 people that were CAC members, so the conversation was a little bit more limited during this breakout. I guess to your question about commenting on themes or things that came out, measurability. When I think about kind of these commitments and how we're going to determine success, I think some are more easily quantifiable, measurable. Others are a little bit more challenged with that, I think. And so that would be a theme that I would urge the board to kind of look at as they think about not the goals necessarily, but these kind of commitments and how we're going to determine if the commitments have been upheld.
all right, so I feel like we did some work, and I feel like the board should hear it. If you're not interested in it moving forward, there doesn't mean that Mrs. Barker and I can't move it forward, for sure. I just was hoping that there would be voices that would be willing to be part of a report or statement or something to talk about it. So
I mean, I'm sorry if I'm coming across as not interested. I thought it was a very worthwhile discussion. I'm not sure I got as much out of my group as I hoped, because we had to spend 15, minutes kind of resetting people's thinking. So we really didn't get we didn't get through the whole list of questions. I do think there's value in this. I think there is value in this not only in the future, but in the here and now, as we're having to rethink everything. So I don't think we should dismiss it. I think we're struggling a little bit even today in the same way that we were last time, in that, you know, maybe this, I know we're going to get to this, you know, how can we make what we learned at that last meeting relevant for the board now and in the future? Or do you really just want it for the future? So maybe if you just help us understand, is this something that you want us to look at and pick out? Because I can easily pick out pieces that my group talked about that I think are important, but in what mindset? For the long-term viability of the district?
Oh, okay, so let's jump to the board piece. We're having a board retreat at the end of the month. And I think that both Mrs. Barker and I are feeling that the board has not talked about the CAC enough. And whether, in my head, what is the value that CAC brings to the board? We have Let's Talk, we have emails, we have telephone calls, we have citizens' comments. So what is it about the CAC that is different, that adds value to what the board is looking for? Is it a convenience that we have a group of people that come and meet and follow through? Or is there a communication or a structure that we have that's different from any other kind of communication system? And in my head, if we do this in a deeper way, we have an opportunity for the community to talk to each other and share their experiences, with the idea that this will also be another piece that the board can use in its guidance. Now, I'm not sure what other board members will feel. Is it just filling up somebody's time? Because if that's the case, then I don't think there's a person here who has time to just show up for meetings. Is it just to fill a role for facilities, or is it to go deeper? We're in a really historical time, and this is a chance for us to really build on our communities and to learn from each other. So from where I sit, and I don't, I can't speak for the board, and we haven't met with the board members, but I think they're going to need to have a conversation about how do you see the CAC adding value to the operations. So in my head, the work we did, the conversation we had was thoughtful. And it does bring, there's no other group that I know of who's talking about these who isn't an educator. So in my head, it's important to bring that forward to the board. If that's not something that the exec team wants, there's no reason why I can't put it together and Mrs. Barker and I can share it with the board. I'm fine with doing that, but it's coming from a board voice, that's all. So in terms of what the CAC and the board is, you're right, the board has not directed us or given us direction of what to do, except the facilities. And I have concerns that that's not going to go to the level that we could really make this happen. So that's where I am tonight.
So I think we need to start out with answering the question, what value do we believe that the CAC brings to the board table? And then I think we need to go into what questions do we need to ask the board at the retreat? What does the CAC want and need to know?
I would highly recommend asking the board what value they feel the CAC brings to the table. Start with the end in mind, and then I would maybe go back and say, what have we presented to the board that has any underpinning of CAC feedback, and elicit feedback from the board to say, how was that received? What was your feeling? And I don't know off the top of my head what topics have been presented that have provided feedback for the CAC. And then I would just say that we haven't been charged to influence. I mean, the issue here, I think, as we kind of peel back the onion, we have not been charged to influence anything but facilities. And so we haven't even got there yet. And so for us to make a generalization that maybe, you know, some of us aren't interested in it, or we're not impacting decisions, we haven't been given the opportunity yet. And I feel like we're just getting started in facilities. And granted, the pandemic has changed the entire discussion. And so facilities is going to really be the first test to determine what I can bring, what the exec team can bring, and what the full committee can bring to the table from a feedback on something that we can actually influence.
And not to say influence, but gather the feelings in the community. I feel that the creation of the CAC was directly towards transparency of the board and feedback to the community. And so piggybacking on what Garrett just said, you know, the last one was more informative last year, right? We knew that the decisions had already been made. We're just kind of disseminating information at that point. But going forward, we knew that it was going to be facilities this year, then COVID. So it's like, everything's changing, and we are fluid and we are going with the flow. But in the discussions that we had, I'm not poo-pooing on them at all, you guys. I didn't mean to come across as that way either. I just wasn't sure what the end was supposed to be. I do now. But number 4, it talks about responsible stewardship. And I think that the CAC and some of these things that we're bringing forth, we are community members, you know? We're not influencers. We're just community members who would like to know and help get the facts, and in my personal humble opinion, so that I can tell others that this is what it is and this is what's happening, or also provide feedback from what we're hearing so that the board can make better decisions. I have no doubt about it that the board has a lot of really interesting decisions to make, especially these days. I'm glad I'm not sitting in your chair, but I appreciate all the work that's going into it. With the hiring, we talked a lot about that in my group from the feedback from the last meeting. What is quality staff? You know, we talked about retention and hiring, like, I don't know, a lot in that group time. How can we, right now, one of the hot topics is high school. Okay, that's the elephant right now. And there's a lot of rumors that, well, why don't we have enough staff? Why can't we do this? Well, let's look at hiring and let's look at retention and let's look at those strategies, because that, I'm not saying me, I'm saying the board, and I have no idea what's going on behind closed doors or what's happening. But I know as a community, it's kind of like, we talked about that in great gory detail on our group session. And I would like to see how that's going to evolve and how that's going to happen. And I have lots of ideas and discussion points on our last meeting and what we talked about. Honestly, it was a couple months ago and I'm back teaching now, so my brain's kind of fried with remembering. But I did read through the notes and I recall a lot of the discussions that we had were about how the district is communicating well. We had a lot of positive feedback on the FAQs, which, Carol, amazing, 76 you said. And then we had some positive about the Facebook page. And then when I read the notes, I looked at another group said, shut down Facebook, you know, shut down this. And our group said, you need to be on Instagram, you need to be on Snapchat. You know, it's like kind of a funny joke type of thing. But I do believe that results happen through communication. That was one of my big things in joining this team, was just so that we could help communicate what is needed from the board and what's the feedback from the community. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Becky, do we need to move to CAC roles and responsibilities? Will that clear some of the fog here?
Well, that's, yeah, yes, we do. So we can, because I think there are a couple of distinct things we need to talk about. My question in terms of the CAC and its work is really going to depend on, as well, is going to depend on what the board wants. And I don't want to waste anybody's time. So if the board isn't going to see this as a valuable thing, then I think that's a conversation the board has to have. So when we look at our own roles, there are a couple of things that are starting to bubble up, and Mrs. Barker and I felt we needed to talk with you all about it, and start and figure out when and how are we going to move on certain things. We have people who have not shown up to meetings, and we had talked about that in terms of how we would address that. So we're at a place where people haven't shown up and haven't told us, so we may have to start addressing that issue. And are you still all comfortable with, I think we were pretty flexible that some people's lives would be such that they couldn't show up, but I think if people don't find it as being a time to come, I think we need to determine that somebody else could sit in that role. Are you good with what we had talked about and considered in terms of attendance?
So I think we need to I really think we need to level set with, you're right. We need to make sure we still have a very engaged group for both the exec and for the CAC. I think we also have to understand that there's just been lots of change in movement with people's schedules and how they're adapting. So I think we should give everyone an opportunity for a reset. So if we can agree to set the meetings, the monthly meetings that we're going to be having, put them on a document that tells people here's our upcoming meetings, and let us know that you're still committed to this group from an exec level. I think that's the place to start. Maybe we will weed some people out that say, you know what, I just can't now, rather than just not turning up or not giving a response. But I think we owe that, I think, to everyone, and just saying, here's our next 4 meetings, whatever we can put the pen to paper on, and giving people an opportunity to either resign if they can't commit, or, just giving people an opportunity, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I would like to get the dates on the calendar so people have those ahead. So yeah, I would agree with that. Other thoughts?
Jen, are you talking beyond exec? Are you talking the whole CAC as well?
I think we have to start with exec. But yeah, I mean, the more we can get on paper, if we can get on paper the next 4 CAC meetings, again, even if we can just reset everyone's mind, say we're here to talk about our task as facilities, and just get people in the right, or do you still want to be part of this? Might be the right thing for us to do at this point, considering the monumental events that have taken place.
Yeah, I would just, my opinion, just slightly nuanced that. I agree. We can't, I'm not willing to kick somebody off based on the rules that we set pre-COVID. But I would just say, from an establishing responsibility standpoint, maybe a little bit more stern or heavy-handed at the exec level. I think your words were perfect. Do you still want to make this commitment to drive kind of the vision of the CAC? And then you're going to get some people that probably fall off, is my guess.
Do you think, Dr. Pearson, do you think we're going to be able to ever do this face-to-face this year? Do we have to keep doing virtual when we bring the whole group together?
Yeah, so it's a large group, and I think we have to be, thoughtful and careful about that. I think the other problem is we may have people that aren't comfortable coming to an in-person meeting, so we have to be thoughtful about planning for that. I can tell you, and this is going to be part of the discussion about the facility master plan with the architect and the board, is I think one of the things that the architect is going to be asking for are some smaller groups that are focused on really 3 broad categories as part of the facility plan. So we would have the whole CAC, but then I think he's going to want to break the group down into 3 smaller groups right now. And I don't want to commit to these categories because the board could say, no, we don't want those. We want something else. So these are fluid. But his recommendation, one is learning spaces, one is community spaces, and one is physical conditions. And there's different things that those groups would work through and look at under those broad categories. And I think one of the things that he's hoping is that we'll be able to take the larger CAC and divide them into smaller working groups on these topics that can be working simultaneously to inform the report. I think if we're in those smaller groups, that it might be even more possible for them to be meeting. But it won't look like a big CAC meeting. They're going to meet in their small groups with the architect teams and then come back and provide some reporting after a period of several weeks. So I know that that's part of his plan is to try, and right now it looks like he wants to try to have these groups meet twice monthly in October, November, and December. That's his hope. So I say that to say, I think people are going to have an opportunity maybe to choose something that they're interested in providing more focused feedback on, but then also maybe work in a smaller task force.
So we kind of
that's great. Would we still, if he's going to want the smaller groups to meet twice a month, would we still be having then one meeting where we all come together, or no? Would we admit that for those 3 months?
So I think the plan would be to do like one large group meeting to kind of provide a charge and lay out the process, and then have people meet in their smaller groups in between, and then a large group meeting at the end. So I could see like a large group meeting in October, then a small group meeting, then 2 small group meetings in November, a small group meeting in December, and then a large group meeting in December, or something like that, kind of along his timeline. So that's the suggestion, and that's one of the things the board is going to weigh in on. I think in particular, the question he's going to have for the board is, these are the topics that we typically explore with the community committee. Are these things that the board wants feedback on, and does it look like they're in the right categories and they're in the right place? So I think after their retreat, we should have specific direction from the board about what topics these small groups should be covering.
Yeah, I would say the more the board can, in their meeting, get specific for the CAC, the better. I think that's a lot of what we heard here today. The more specific they can get, the better we can communicate with the wider group, both exec and the wider group, and see who we have that wants to continue this effort.
Well, and honestly, I feel like in light of all of the other chaos and uncertainty that's going on, this is pretty focused and defined work. So if nothing else, it will provide a very kind of truncated timeline and focused conversations around what are really critical things for us to be thinking about going forward as an organization.
So in terms of that will take us quite a ways, and in terms of again, waiting for the board, are we pretty clear in terms of what individual members' roles are supposed to be, or do you think that the board needs to be more specific so people do know what they are supposed to do? I'm really like, I really don't think the board has been very direct on what to do, and except for facilities. And I think it's because it's a new kind of committee. We've taken the role of, as what Mrs. Barker talked about, as learning. And then COVID came, and now it's not just learning, it's survival, and it's how do things work. So we've got stuff layered on top. So in terms of the role that you play, have you seen yourself during this COVID period as bringing to the table of CAC information that you've gathered, or that could be something we consider as the board starts to look at its at the CAC's role? Do you feel that that two-way street could really work, or do you want to wait until the board tells you what it wants? It's kind of not a very clear question, but.
I was going to say, well, I don't know. I thought we had talked in the past, and Jill, you probably have better notes than I do right now, about what our vision was. And we have our norms and we have our ideas. And I'm wondering if we can print that out and hand it to them, not us, but you guys at the retreat, and just say, so what, as the board, what would you like to see different? What would you like to see improved upon or added to based on what's going on in the world today? I think that might not, I mean, it would be more of a, this is what we were doing, this is what we've done, and now moving forward, how do you feel or perceive, like kind of what, building on what Gareth said and Pat too.
I could definitely do that.
I think we're still forming. I mean, we're in that learning process, and as we've all said, then COVID hit and shoop. And even while we were at that July board or CAC meeting and breaking into those groups and talking about initiatives, behind the scenes, most of us were involved in small group committees that were working on the school process because of COVID, whichever group you may or may not have been involved in. So we went through the practice activity, if you will, in the fall. And as Garrett said, we're not yet to what we've been charged with, to the facilities. But what we're doing is getting enough information. We're getting the information we need to then become part of facilities. So we're looking at our initiatives, and is that going to make an impact on what we think about facilities and learning spaces and whatever else? And so perhaps our roles and responsibilities haven't happened yet because we're not in the midst of what our first charge is.
You know, I think one thing I'd just like to add to that as well, when you're speaking with the board about this, the role of both exec and the wider CAC, didn't they find value in having members of the CAC exec on those committees? And I can't recall if you had, yeah, you did actually. The wider CAC also were on those committees. Did they find value in that? Because that wasn't our original charge. I found great value in being able to, when I was talking, you know, with the community, to say I was part of something. It let the community, I felt as though the community was like, oh, great, there are community members involved in these discussions on one level or another. So was that valuable to the board? And then that might help them think about how we can be most beneficial in addition to facilities.
I received feedback from the chairs of all of those task force committees thanking me and wanting me to pass that thanks on to the members of the CAC who participated in those task force, because their voices were invaluable, not only because they were parents and community members, but also because they had already done some work as part of the CAC, and their voice was really important. I can't tell you, there was on numerous occasions I had the chairs, especially of the learning committee, just thanking me for the parents that were involved on that committee.
That's great. So
I think, oh, I was going to say another thing we could add is I think sometimes when we're in a learning situation or a corporate situation, we have our silos. You know, we have our curriculum team, we have our administrative team, we have our teachers, and then we have our pods within that. And then we have, and I think having community members on those task force teams, even though I stirred the pot a lot, sorry, Carol, I feel like those silos were broken up a little bit, so they could maybe think a little bit outside of that on many of the topics.
That's exactly the reason that you were so valuable on there, even, and you did stir the pot, but you know what? That helps me think about the way we're communicating and the messages that parents need and how we can put it in terms that parents understand. It was very valuable for me to have CAC members on my committee.
So I guess I want to throw this out there. A lot of what we've been doing is either A, learning, B, sort of working or operating to give administration more information or input, so really working more as what like a superintendent's advisory council would work, just because we weren't ready to move to the next level of actually being a board advisory. And so I think that that's something that we're going to bring back to the entire board at the retreat, because we need to function as a board committee. And I think that's also going to include maybe breaking into different segments ourselves, having representatives of the exec committee at like learning and teaching committee, and being able to talk about what's going on there at our meetings, so that there's more interaction with the board. Or once we have some information from the architect about how those meetings went with the larger CAC, that the exec team compiles that and brings that information to the board with. I know that the architect firm will be bringing that as well, but maybe that somehow you're part of that. So your advisory portion to the board doesn't get left out, because that, while it's great to be able to advise administration, it's very helpful. We also want to make sure you're advising the board members, because that it was the original reason this is created. Does that make sense? Any thoughts about that?
And I think, Jillian, you and I have some work to do with the board as well, so this is helpful for sure. I want to ask another question. Has CAC had any impact on you? Have you gained information from working with other people, being involved in any of the breakouts and any of the work you've done? Or would you say that it is pretty much, it hasn't had any influence on your thinking, or has it? I'm really curious what you gained from being on CAC.
I mean, it certainly had an impact on me, someone who has, very little ties to education in a career sense. So, I learn a lot from Gareth when I sit next to him, or when I'm on this call listening, and I learn a lot from the other educators around the table. I also think it's probably a weakness for me that last session was harder on the commitments, because so much of it was about the elements of not curriculum, but teaching, and so it was probably a little bit tougher to get through some of those questions or be able to guide it, because I'm not an educator. But I certainly, even the COVID pieces aside, I think our meetings have definitely shed a lot of light on, and I grew up in this district, but it's grown so much, and there's so many intricate details. And I especially want to compliment when you bring those leaders to the table, at those, especially at the COVID meetings, Carol, at your meetings, seeing all the different administrators That was really helpful. And when Dr. Pearson brought them to the meetings last spring and fall, you know, that was extremely helpful. So certainly from my point of view, I'm still learning, especially being a non-educator.
Great. I don't know if it's an impact, or if it's a wondering of, or if it's a I don't know which it is, because I still struggle with, maybe just me personally, what's my role. I don't have the contact that some of our folks here who are parents in the district and know that day-to-day stuff now way more than I do. So I sometimes feel like, okay, I don't have those connections. I can give you lots of previous experience, which hopefully is the reason I sit here. But I also struggle with, our breakout sessions are great, but are we getting the thoughts and feelings of the 27 people on the CAC? Or are we truly getting the thoughts and feelings of the greater D303 community? And that's a question that I've asked before. And maybe it's a matter of our group evolving. Maybe we will become contact people at some point in time. I'm just not sure that we're there yet. And I think we need to be, if we are going to inform the board, because the board needs to be informed about a bigger community feeling than the 27 CAC members.
I think that's a good point, Pat, and I want to just elaborate on that a little bit. First off, on the role piece, I don't personally struggle with the role. I think we're all serving an equal role to advise on this committee, and just because even we're on the executive team, we kind of get the information first and guide the agenda. But the executive team, I don't struggle with the role unless there's a task at hand. And then the task is kind of broken down depending on workload and for individuals. When I think about, to your question, Becky, about kind of reflecting on this process, I really see this being almost like a feedback loop. And this is building on your points, Pat. I feel like we've been somewhat effective at providing the 20+7 CAC members feedback to the board somewhat in the midst of a pandemic. But we did not have an actionable item to provide feedback on. So I think we all kind of get a pass on that because we're not going to provide the feedback or influence or whichever word we want to kind of use for that until we get to the facilities point. But then, and Dr. Pearson said this early on at one of our first meetings, when we come back around that loop, we then have to have a common message to the community. And it can vary depending on perspectives and our opinions. But when we leave a CAC or leave a conversation around a specific topic, facilities or whatever, there kind of needs to be a common message that comes back to the community that we're building on, especially for the next time, and then getting more feedback. So I don't think we've been that effective as a group to say, this is what was said. This is kind of the key takeaways, salient themes. This is kind of how the group is thinking about this next, and looking for opportunity for feedback. Now, we're figuring that out. And so I'm not saying that we should have already figured that out, but that's kind of how I think about that. And we all serve an equal role to sit somewhere in that loop process.
Okay. Kelly, do you have any thoughts?
Come on, Becky, you know I do. I think that I have enjoyed this committee very much. I would hope to see it continue. I feel that many people do come to me. They always have. I'm in several, I get several messages about things, and usually I don't respond unless I know the factual answer from somebody that has specifically told me whatever that answer is. And Carol's gotten a few emails from me just like, explain this, explain that. And I feel that just by listening and not necessarily giving feedback is a good role. And that was another reason why I wanted to be on this committee, to listen, not necessarily to tell. And I feel that by listening to what others are talking about or recognizing or envisioning, and their perception of that can be valuable. And also to feed that back to this group. I feel that this group is a place where I can kind of speak my thoughts and not be criticized for or not. I feel it's like a safe place to express what's happening in our community. And by being on this committee, the exec board, I feel that is a great service to D303. And having the CAC as a whole, as we call it, is a great service to D303. That transparency is breaking down a little bit. It's tough when you're on the CAC, how come you don't know that? You know, you get that question. And it's like, well, I don't know. I was asleep at that moment in time when somebody was talking, you know, I don't know. I feel that lots of times they will ask, and they're just parents and friends of my kids' friends. And maybe I wouldn't go to the movies with them, but they'll still text me and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I do listen to all the board meetings, and I do listen to the other meetings, and I try to be as informed as possible. But I feel that this committee has a place in D303. I hope that the board would recognize that that place is just for communication and transparency and maybe even some feedback. Sometimes they might hear things they don't want to hear, and that's just my point of view. Within my brain, that's in my area that I try to service. And I know Jill and Becky, you guys worked really hard in picking people on the CAC as a whole from all sorts of different demographics, including non-parents, business members, all of that. So I think it's valuable to remember that why this committee was formed and why it needs to continue. And hopefully that's not on the table, but if it were something where the board didn't see value, then what is it, like Garrett said, that they are asking for, they are looking for? So, yeah.
So I do think one thing we haven't talked about with roles and responsibilities, and we're kind of bouncing around a little bit, but one of the things we did want to talk about is not just attendance, but about something we brought up early on about, you know, member behavior, and how would we handle that? Maybe behavior that wasn't necessarily helping to get a message out or get factual information out, or was perhaps not really kind of showing the intended purpose of the CAC.
Are you talking about members of the exec, or are we talking about the broader CAC, or both?
CAC, both. I mean, anybody.
I think that Jen had brought this up way back when we first started meeting, Jen, if you remember, about how I was like, be stern, you know, but then here I am late because of internet issues and whatever. But I feel like just having a conversation was what we had discussed. And I don't know who, and I don't recall if it was Becky and Jill that were going to lead the way in that.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the role of the exec team to do that. But I think as you know, we go into the next phase, we may just want to remind people that I don't know, that I guess we just want people to be respectful and respectful of different opinions, and
I think whether or not they're in a meeting or not, I think is the purpose of that. I think
so
that,
sorry, you have me worried. Am I missing something? Like, do we have there been incidences on the recent meetings, or
no?
That okay. So this is just looking at it from a holistic point of view.
Yeah. Right. We have, it's a large group. There are interactions all over the community that are happening. And those of you who might be on social media know that some of those are positive and informative. That doesn't mean that we're always glowing about things that are going on. It just means that it's informative and it looks to inform rather than maybe not exactly, maybe saying things that aren't exactly information that has come from the CAC. So just thinking about kind of some of those interactions or interactions that, may not be what we see in a positive light.
Without kind of being too ambiguous here or just kind of making assumptions, I guess if it were to happen during a meeting time, I would definitely lean on our norms, and just ask that that individual follow those norms. And so that'd be my first statement. If it's happening outside of the situation, it probably is, outside of the meeting time, it's probably speaking to the fact that we're not effective at communicating to that person. And it's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And if we have evidence that a message that we've tried to be clear on is not being delivered clearly, we need to have a conversation to try to figure out. It's not a judgment. I mean, there's no one on here that should be making a judgment on that individual, but we should be having a conversation with them about why the message is getting mixed. Is it malicious? Is it, what's the intent here? And it seems, I feel like I'm in kind of an oxymoronic situation, because if we're on a citizens advisory committee where the community is advising the board and there's somebody that's doing something that is antagonistic to that goal, then we've got a problem that we've got to resolve, and it has to start with communication with those individuals.
So
well, and it may also require this committee to think about our respectfulness both within the meeting and our norms. I completely agree. And does this committee need to have, communication norms or whatever we might call it outside the meeting?
Yeah, that's a good thought. And maybe Thursday, I know that Dr. Chapman's presentation will take the entire time, right, Dr. Pearson? Whoop, sorry.
Yeah, it's like 47 slides. It's quite a bit of information. It's really good. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a great discussion. I think it's going to be really critical for kind of it's School Finance 101 in the context of District 303. It's going to be really informative, but it's going to take some time.
So if we're going to add the buzz to the meeting, I don't think we can get into anything else on Thursday. But maybe we'll come back together before we have our October meeting. So we'll know more what the architects want to do. The board will have more direction. Hopefully, we'll have some I'm sure we'll have a good conversation with the board. My gut tells me they want the CAC to be very successful. So I think that'll be, we'll get that out once the retreat has completed, and then we can talk as a group. What do we need to do? Maybe little pieces at every meeting, just as reminders or setting communication norms for when we leave. I kind of like that idea, because then it doesn't say you have to say it this way, but there's a respectful way or something. So that might be something for us to work on.
Can you just clarify that? You said, who wants the CAC to be successful? The board?
I think so.
Well, why? I don't understand why that would even be like a point of debate. I'm confused on even that kind of line of statement. Of course, they want the CAC to be successful. I mean, I'm just coming into that maybe with blinders, that I'm not sure why that would even be a discussion. Do you want the CAC to be successful? I'm confused on that.
Okay, I'm at a point where the board hasn't given CAC direction, so I don't want it to just be a committee that I wanted to go deeper. That's where I'm coming from, unless the board says, no, Becky, we just want to have them do committee work when we want them to do committee work, then that's a different. So I'm sorry if you took it that I did, you know, I don't know how you got confused. It's just the board hasn't talked about CAC deep enough. So I believe that they want us to be successful. I just don't know what that looks like at this point in time. And that's a conversation the board has to have.
Okay, thank you for
Does that make
clarifying.
more sense, or?
It does, but I mean, I think for everybody's benefit, if there's any hesitation that any board members have about the not the role, but the existence of the CAC, please, by all means, be transparent to tell us.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not saying that. I don't know a thing. I'm telling you, I don't know. And that's why the retreat to me is really important. I'm not trying to have you read between the lines. I'm just stating that I think we have to have that conversation at the board level. So because of everything that you all have said, you know, what is our direction? What does the board want in terms of feedback? All of those pieces. And we haven't talked about that as a board yet. So the retreat's going to be really important. Kelly, you have your hand up.
And you've had some leadership changes on the board too, right? Is that correct?
We've had some changes on the board.
Yes.
Have you had leadership changes, or I don't know if it's actually new individuals or if it's just changing of responsibilities?
Yeah, we have a different board president. Yes. Kelly?
I just wanted, I apologize. My internet went haywire when Garrett was speaking about this topic, so I may be repeating some of what he said. But I feel that there's a lot of stuff being said about this administration and our board in the community right now. And I feel, as a CAC member, I am not fueling that fire. I feel that maybe something should be said at the committee of a whole, in that you are a representative of a committee that serves for the board. I don't know if that's a true statement, so you can adjust that statement, but I have seen several comments on several social media sites that are disconcerting. And I can see where some board members might say, well, why are you on the CAC? You know, so I could see where there is some of that strife. Now, having said that, if they're doing it at the meeting, we can address it. But if they're doing it in their personal time, you know, that's a real fine line. So I don't know if we just need to have a statement. And also, I like the idea of putting the norms in the chat, because we have those little table tents at every meeting. Can we just put them, here are the norms, we're starting the meeting. So just an idea.
We can always have a norms review quickly on the agenda as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good process as well. So Garrett, are you okay? I feel like that was, I threw a wrench into your thinking.
I obviously misinterpreted. It's probably coming off the cuff of Jill's comments of there's obviously board concern that somebody in the CAC is misinterpreting or delivering misinformation intentionally. And then I heard your comment as determining if the board finds value in the CAC and or wants the CAC to be successful. And so I'm hearing kind of a tone there of just maybe dissension between how the board views, somebody on the board views the CAC with those two kind of pieces of information.
I'll be clear, you know, the board doesn't have any idea what as far as what we're discussing right now. We never landed on how we were handling situations that came about where we may have a member that right now, future forward, that may not represent this committee and its vision and values, or however you want to term it, to the satisfaction of the members? And what kind of statements, what is the plan to either A, work with that individual, or B, when is it time to say, this may not be for you? Does that make sense?
It does. And I would just say, I would have a hard time reacting to, first off, I don't even think I should react to that, but if you're asking for a reaction to that, I just don't have any comments to make in that kind of ambiguity. But I don't think it's my role other than to communicate to that individual as another citizen of the community. And then if it's, let's address holistically how this group should be operating in the community. I kind of fall in Kelly's side of that camp around the fact that it's probably a fine line of what's our jurisdiction, if anything. Yeah, I get it. We have norms and we have a jurisdiction over meeting norms, but what people talk about or post, I don't think I can.
I think this is a tough one, and to be really transparent, we're public and live right now, so this is a very awkward kind of situation. And I don't believe that it's, I think what we were looking for was what your thinking was in terms of behavior, not necessarily about an individual, but what kinds of behaviors do we expect?
It's ambiguous because it's not. So I think, I can make up a scenario, but I think that's, fruitless. But it's going to happen where we have something that it may be. And what I'm hearing from one person, but I haven't heard from anyone else, is that don't think it's a role as a citizen, but we should put something together about how we should be operating. So that's an aspect we need to land on. That's my point.
But we have that in our norms, correct?
That's how you operate within a meeting.
Within a meeting, right? And if you, as a board, Jill and Becky, and even Dr. Pearson, want to put something in addition to that, I don't think that falls on us as far as what that role should be. I only know how I can conduct myself outside of a meeting. And if somebody, like Garrett said, comes up to me and wants to have a debate about it, heck yeah, I'll go with the facts that I know and I'll debate you on it. But your opinion is still your opinion, and I'm not going to criticize or even step on you for having that opinion. And I think that it's important to have some opinions within the CAC. God knows I'm very opinionated, but there's a fine line with harassment and opinionated, or beating a topic that shouldn't be even discussed in a forum. But I'm not in control of that, and I don't think it's placed for the CAC to have that. Now, if it happens at a meeting and they're combatant or discriminative or whatever, then absolutely we'll address that. But I think if it wants to come from the board to all of us, that's a decision you guys get to make.
I would hope that our CAC members are people who follow our norms. I'm struggling a little bit with how can you be a person who follows our norms just in the meeting, but not that kind of person outside of our meeting? And how can you be a problem solver and come from a place of inquiry and seek to understand and not criticize in a 2-hour meeting, and then turn around and don't behave in that manner outside of a meeting? So I would hope that the people who decided that the CAC was worth their time and their energy and their interest would be those kinds of people that were seeking to make D303 a better, even better place. But I'm not going to be naive enough to think that perhaps that's not always the case. And do we have jurisdiction over what they post out there? I would just hope that their reasons for being on the CAC fit within those norms. you know, I don't want to tell somebody how to act outside, but I just hope those are the kinds of people who are striving to work to strengthen the district and any way that's possible.
I mean, technically, this is not a situation where you have jurisdiction. We're not coming down and handing out any sort of consequence. However, what I wanted from you is that if there was something that maybe this wasn't working, how would you want it to be handled? And obviously, I think we need to put something together and post that to the board, the rest of the board, along with all of the other materials that they've looked at. We can review with them.
So I think that again, this is something the board should look at. I think we have to be realistic. The group of people we have are very invested in our district. They may end up running for the school board and running against one of us. And that means it'll be a different kind of dialogue. There's no way that I would expect people to stop saying their beliefs, so it is a fine line. And I think we just need to have a conversation about the communication after the meeting. If and hopefully we'll never have to deal with a real specific incident, but it's something that we just need to keep in our forefront as we move into the next realm of our work. It is already 7:40-ish. I was hoping we would be done half an hour ago. I think we have jumped around the agenda. I think we've covered all of the agenda pieces. Mrs. Smith, does it look that way to you? So I don't do a open meetings issue.
I think you're fine.
Dr. Pearson, is there anything you want to finish up or add to the conversation here?
No, I would just say, I mean, we started this group, and I think a lot of what's been talked about tonight, it centers around the fact that we started as a new group, really didn't have an idea of what it would look like or how it would function. And then we threw kind of a national crisis in the middle of it, and we're still forming. I liked what Pat said, we're still forming an identity and trying to make sure that what the work that everybody's volunteering to do is really purposeful and really does help inform the board and move the district forward. And I have great hopes for that's what's going to happen. I've been a part of many community groups through my career, as I'm sure all of you have. And I think one of the things that's exciting about this group is that we have a cohort of people that have committed to learn together and invest time together, so that when they provide feedback, that it's an informed discussion as opposed to just a focus group kind of scenario, which I think we talked about early on. And I think that there's tremendous power in that. So all of these pieces that we're doing along the way, unpacking and talking about the commitments, understanding the district finances and how we as a district sit in the light of kind of the statewide financial situation, and then being able to provide really informed feedback about a facility master plan. All of that's like the next level of conversation. And I'm just looking forward to getting to a point where we have some normalcy there and we're able to actually function as a group in that context. So I appreciate all that you're doing to help lead that work as a team. And I think both the board and myself as superintendent find real value in this.
Any others? Thank you, Dr. Pearson. Any other thoughts to finish up?
I'd just like to land, like we want to do in our meeting on Thursday, the consensus. Like what, above all, what do we feel we need to do on Thursday to have a successful meeting? What's the message?
Well, in terms of the meeting itself, the logistics, we're going to add a time for people to share what's on their minds. And we will make it very clear as to that this is another learning piece. Having seen Dr. Chapman's presentations over the years, it will be really informative. People will learn a ton, and they'll probably have good, really great questions. I don't know that there's anything more after that. I think what we need to say to the CAC is that the board retreat's going to be an important piece because the board's going to focus on its vision for facilities. And we also need to have a conversation on the direction that they are expecting CAC to go as well. So that's a conversation.
Do you think that we could add at the end what some action items are, what next steps are? Like Dr. Pearson had alluded to maybe doing small groups, something like that. I don't know if it's set in stone. So whatever is, happening, just kind of like, so we're not in limbo of, okay, we're learning again. How is this? How am I contributing? So it's more of a reminder, like Garrett said, this is the topic we were tasked for all year. And so it's going to take a little while. This is just learning about it so that we can move forward and possibly go into XYZ for the future. And Dr. Pearson may have to decide if that's going to be how we do it. So.
And this time we're learning together, where in the past the exec team maybe has had some insights. We're learning with the rest of the CAC this time. So I think for me that's a very different approach than like the last meeting. So that's why I wanted to be crystal clear.
You won't have any specific roles that you will need to lead. You can actually sit back and just be a member and a learner. And Dr. Pearson, you can kind of lead at the end there where we're going with what we think is going to happen. Okay.
Right, because we have the facilities master plan on as future agenda items. So that would be an opportunity for us to kind of wrap that up and move it forward.
Thank you, everyone. I miss being in the same room with you. My hands, I'm an Italian and I like to talk with my hands, and it just doesn't work on this kind of format. But I know that we all appreciate your time and your work and your dedication to the district and to your kids. So we appreciate it. And any final comments? All right. And it is 7:44 and we'll call the meeting to an end. Thank you all. We'll see you on Thursday night.